Yeah, thank you and welcome everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here. Um, so, yes, I'm a social scientist at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, and I have the pleasure of, let's say, giving you a little bit more of an overview perspective on the issue, and of course, from a social science perspective. So can you see my screen? Can you see my slides? Yeah, okay. Then I'll just get started. So I would like to elaborate a little bit on work we have been doing also with Eric, but also with colleagues from the Climate Clean Air Coalition. And yeah, maybe just first of all, give you some view on where we, let's say, where we stand with integrative approaches and with integration of this Nexus approach that Eric just mentioned. And then go more or move towards where we are really, where we are going, or where we would like to go actually with a one atmosphere approach. So I think it's not really new to you who have participated in this seminar series that when I speak of that approaches, scientific, but also, of course, policy approaches that go beyond a single impact thing, or whether it's climate or air quality or health only. And those approaches that are then more integrative are often much more effective, and that one idea to put these into practice is the co-benefits approach, that policies with the co-benefits approach can often be quite coherent and useful and suitable for policy making. However, when we look into the political practice, I think it's only very slow that that we see co-benefits or co-impacts, multiple impacts, that we see them realized in the political practice. So maybe it's good then to look, first of all, to scan a little bit the landscape, the governance landscape. Of course, policy making is always the first where we look at, or where we also put our, let's say, blames on. And I think there are definitely some, let's say, structural barriers to more integrative approaches, to approaches that look at more than just one impact. So globally, I would say we have an environmental regime, or let's say an environmental landscape that is really fragmented. And we say, from a very social scientist perspective, I guess, polycentric, with a growing complexity. So we have institutions and treaties, policies that really traditionally evolved more parallel to each other and not so much complementing. So that's why often these institutions focus just on, or have been focusing more on climate or on air quality, but not on the more holistic view. I guess it's also clear that many of these barriers are not only on the very global and overall level and the frameworks level, but also, of course, we have similar ones on the national level, where we often have a more horizontal division in administration. So maybe just a little example also from my home country, from Germany, where we have, and now very new after our government, we have just a new government. Now we have not only an environmental ministry, we have also a ministry for climate and energy, but then of course there's the ministry for health. And when we look, for example, at let's take the issue of methane, this is really a typical issue where policy making is quite fragmented. So even within the Ministry of Environment, we have at least, I think it's 4 different divisions ranging from air quality to waste and agriculture that work on the issue of methane. But then in addition, we have also the Ministry for Energy and Climate working on methane, but we have also the Ministry for Agriculture working on this issue. And this of course, many of them have different monitoring protocols, budgeting and reporting frequencies. And this is often, of course, leads to yeah, we have at least an inefficiency in many policy ways, many governance ways. And I think it's especially problematic when we have also a power imbalance or some competition between these divisions. Like, for example, for financial institutions, so often I think we have a classic case that like the ministry or the division that works more on climate has more access to finances than often, like, at least in our case, the air quality one. And I think these divisions often lead to the case that not the whole of potential benefits and multiple benefits and co-benefits can be achieved. Of course, we have then also what we could call a more vertical division. So that is in the governmental levels that we have some divisions between the very local and the very more international and global levels, which is of course often rooted in the fact that air quality is traditionally seen as something that concerns more the local communities, and it's only more recent, or like the transboundary effect is only slowly being recognized more globally. And on the climate side, of course, we have from the beginning a very global definition of warming. It's global warming, and only recently, I think there's more recognition also for the local efforts made. But yeah, of course, it's not only policy making to blame. I think there's, of course, also what Eric also, I think, referred to many facts already, that there is challenges in the science policy, and I would even say in the science policy civil society interface, where, of course, scientists often say, yeah, we don't have enough channels to talk to policymakers, or these channels are limited and irregular, or some also say they're very selective. So some of the scientists have the ear of the policymakers and others don't. But I think maybe even the more outstanding challenge goes very clear on what Eric already mentioned with, or referred to as, feasibility. So I believe there's really often a missing step when we have, for example, with our co-benefits approach, we have very good models. As Eric said, we have now very good scientific literature on this, which is often based on energy modeling, natural science, data-based. But then there is like this step that translates these models into policy action and the policy practice and in political understanding. That's often the step that's missing. So that's where more social science-based and more qualitative tools would really have a space. But this is something where we still need to work on. Of course, more on the science side, I think it's also easy to say that these communities, like the more air quality and atmospheric science community and the climate community, that there's also often separate communities. And last but not least, I guess a very more policy-oriented aspect is that often, well, this science and these models are really, really complex, and it's just quite a challenge to translate and into more a policy perspective. But now maybe moving to the part where I say, well, where are we going? I think it is clear, and that's the good news, is that we are going towards more integration. And I think this can be seen, of course, and when we again go back to more international agreement and our international policy landscape, we have good examples there. So we have, for example, the Paris Agreement, where we are able now to not only include the classic greenhouse gases, but countries can as well include short-lived climate pollutants. It's at least voluntary to put measures on black carbon or so into their national approaches. So that's more integrative then. we have also probably more EU and US focused the long range, the Convention on Long Range Transparent Air Pollution, the CLR-TAP, where there is some discussion going on of including also methane. So I would say this is, of course, a notion of a move where more climate aspects might be integrated. And then, of course, there's also many regional national policies that have started to have either more co-benefits oriented approaches or at least focus for all. This is saying that also the governance landscape in not only in climate, but I think in many environmental aspects has broadened. So we have much more, we call them in the social sciences, non-traditional actors. So actors that are not only governance, but where governments and science and civil society work together. And I think a good example is, for example, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, a voluntary group of partners where countries, scientists, some private sector, some civil societies groups work together on short-lived climate pollutants, but this goes beyond air quality and climate, and also they focus strongly on energy security, food security issues. So I think that's a good example. So, but maybe in the last part of this presentation, let's have a quick view on the more practice and what with colleagues like, as I mentioned, Eric and some colleagues from the Climate Clean Air Coalition, we have been thinking about what would be, or maybe based on our practical experience and policy experience, what are aspects that could bring us closer to this one atmosphere, this integrative approach. And interestingly, I think the first one that came to my mind is something that is really not so tangible, maybe. So we said it's good to start policy making really with a holistic vision. So this is what I mean with intangible. It's really a vision of that that the world is, let's say, the world is bigger, and that the impacts go beyond just one single aspect and are more co-benefits, co-impacts oriented. So. And I think this is always a good starting point also for policymaking to say, okay, this is not only a climate policy, but this is a policy that will have effects on many other areas. And one good example from the practice that we looked at a little bit stronger is, for example, in Nigeria, where they designed a short-lived climate policy plan. And we talked to the colleagues in Nigeria. The one thing they really mentioned is that from an early beginning, they started with this, that this is not only a short-lived climate and a near-term warming plan, but they wanted to integrate many more concerns, stakeholders, and visions to get support and to get this plan on board. So I believe this vision, this more holistic vision, is something that needs to be, of course, designed and updated during the whole policy process and the whole decision-making process. And what we felt, and when we discussed, is also another aspect, is that these visions often there are windows of opportunities. And then, for example, crisis like the one we are facing right now, the COVID pandemic, even though of course it has like it has hit us all very badly. I think these crises might be points where one, like, let's think of recovery plans where when these types of visions can move us stronger, when implied, we can move us much stronger to a more integrative and holistic approach. So the second aspect we looked at is really the concrete collaboration between governmental agencies, but also the integration of multiple stakeholders. And what can be done there? I think also, again, the example from our Nigerian colleagues was great. So the one aspect that they did very well was, for example, the creation of an interagency task force. So when they started with this SLCP plan, they came up with an especially SLCP coordination office, which figured really as the focal point for coordination among agencies, which then set up task groups with different other ministries, and where other colleagues from other ministries participated, but then also started to design this stakeholder involvement process where they really from early on coordinated and invited stakeholders that could give their inputs. But I think mostly also this interagency collaboration was able to generate strong support within for this broader plan, for this broader SLCP plan. So other aspects, of course, that can help and that can help to move to stronger collaboration are staff rotations and the stronger building of a multidisciplinary expertise. So I think it's just sitting together and working stronger on collaborative on plans or doing capacity building aspects. So I remember, for example, we had a little workshop on the issue of methane, where we invited really persons from here in Germany, from the ministries for agriculture, for the Ministry for Environment, the energy, but also the Ministry of the Foreign Relations. So we had really, really different, very heterogeneous set of people invited. And this will often, I think, just sitting together, working on something helps to strong understand. Policy plans are where we have a budget, and this budget is tagged not only to a climate goal, but maybe to further ones. Then we can also have this more integration gained by this. Of course, also this, what I meant as vertical integration, is also something that can be strengthened. So if national policy, let's take again, a climate policy making also includes options for cities and to strengthen action on city level, of course, we also then strengthen the cooperation between these different governmental levels. Yeah, I guess I mentioned already this inclusion of stakeholders, which I believe is fundamental to successful policy making. And as I just mentioned, in this Nigerian example for their short-lived climate pollutant plan, our colleagues told us that they really, from a very early step, invited other agency, but also stakeholders. They invited them already in the launch meeting when they started this process of planning, and then throughout the whole policymaking process, they had some kind of a force and back with them. And then also at the stage when it came to, so they had this plan adapted, but when it came more to the implementation, of course, then having created some sort of ownership of this plan, because more entities were participating, they had much more success with the implementation of this and much more support. So this is, I know I'm already talking quite long, so this is my last slide. And I think the last aspect is more, of course, science oriented. And we said, well, it would also be great on the science side to, well, it's of course a science policy interface, I guess. It's just more standardized metrics and assessment models. So of course, it would be good if, for example, there was some more unified reporting, not only on a single impact like the greenhouse gases, but if it's possible also to include other pollutants, such as like carbon, in your reports. That's something that, for example, Ghana did when they had their 2019 UNEP-DTU inventory report. And what they said is basically that this having reporting even on pollutants they were not obligated to report, that their report would gain much more relevance for more policymakers, but also relevance for energy security, etc. And this can be done, of course, through the application of more integrative tools. So one tool that, for example, the Climate in Clean Air Coalition applies is this LEAP IBC, the Integrated Benefits Calculator, a tool which really has some sort of a dashboard where they report on both short-lived climate pollutants and greenhouse gases, but also look at the benefits these bring, like, for example, the avoidance of premature deaths, crop loss, and they bring them all together. So it's easier to be shown to policymakers, or it's much clearer evidence. But again, it's, I guess, to close this up, it's moving back to what Eric said a little bit also in his presentation. I think it's still very, very important to adopt or to make these models and scenarios, make them really design them closer to the needs of policy making. So make this translation between data and messages maybe. Another aspect is this really of considering more qualitative data, so more experience, so that we all, and I guess also in policy, there is a lot of experience with what works better in what case, and what people, what target groups do we need to get on board to get support for policy making. So there's experience, and I think this more qualitative experience needs to be fed into also in the more modeling and hard science approaches, I guess. And yeah, maybe to close this up, of course, as a more policy or political and social scientist, when I look at these more natural science-based models, of course, they are really, really complex. And I think to translate them more into policy vision, it is really often necessary to reduce this complexity and to find what are really the points that we need to bring out into the world. So with this, I would like to close, and thank you very much again for the invitation.